Before this trial even begins, understand what the galaxy is really judging. Captain Alien Ward is not accused of conquest, murder, or invasion. He is standing before the Vorathi Dominion Court because humans crossed borders to save lives no one else would reach. And in this court, mercy itself may become humanity's greatest crime.
Captain Alien Ward was sentenced before the trial began, because the Vera Dominion Court had already decided what kind of monster humanity was. The evidence floated above him in a ring of cold blue light: 17 border violations, 9 quarantine breaches, 4 unauthorized landings inside active war zones, and 1 act so unforgivable that half the chamber refused to look directly at the recording. A human rescue ship had entered enemy space, ignored 3 orders to withdraw, and pulled 9,000 alien children out of a burning orbital nursery before the moon beneath it broke apart. The prosecutor called it interference. The judges called it destabilization. The dead would have called it mercy, but the dead were not permitted to testify in Dominion law. Alien stood alone at the center of the chamber with his wrists unlocked, his uniform scorched at one sleeve, and a medical patch still stuck to his collar from the evacuation he had survived 12 hours earlier. Around him, the galaxy watched through suspended feeds. Every allied government, every rival species, every frightened border world that had ever whispered humanity's name like a warning waited to see whether Earth's rescue fleet would be dismantled. The accusation was simple: humans were too emotionally dangerous to be allowed near disaster. They did not wait for permission. They did not respect sealed borders. They heard screams through static and treated law like an obstacle between themselves and the living. High Judge Mayrix lowered his silver gaze. Captain Ward, do you deny violating Dominion emergency restrictions? No, Alien said. A ripple passed through the court, sharp and hungry. The prosecutor smiled, because confession made execution easier. Alien looked at the recorded image of the burning nursery, at the small figures being carried through smoke by humans who had known they were landing on hostile ground. Then he raised his eyes to the judges. I only want to know how many children your restrictions saved. The ripple died. At the far end of the bench, the youngest judge, Sarai Vaughn, went completely still. No one noticed except Alien, and even he almost missed it. Her expression remained disciplined, her posture flawless, but her fingers had tightened around the edge of her judgment slate. One of the images in the evidence ring had caught her attention. A charred human medical patch recovered from a rescue site 22 years earlier, sealed under a Dominion classification code that should not have existed. The prosecutor continued speaking, but Sarai was no longer listening. She was staring at the patch like it had reached out of the past and placed a hand around her throat. Then the court clerk opened the final charge, and the chamber fell silent. If Alien failed to prove humanity's compassion was not a threat, Earth would lose the legal right to answer any unclaimed distress signal in known space. Somewhere beyond the court, thousands would keep dying in places too poor, too distant, or too politically inconvenient to be saved. Sarai looked down at the sealed file again. This time, she recognized the symbol beside the patch. It was from the night she had been rescued.
So far, Captain Alien Ward has admitted the truth without fear. Humanity broke Dominion restrictions, crossed forbidden borders, and rescued 9,000 alien children from a burning arbitrary nursery. But his question has already shaken the court. How many lives did the law actually save? Now Judge Serivan has recognized a symbol from a sealed file, a human medical patch connected to the night she herself was rescued. The trial is no longer only about Earth Rescue Fleet. Something hidden in Dominion history is beginning to surface.
The Dominion prosecutor, Valus, did not raise his voice when he began the formal argument against humanity, and that made the accusation more dangerous. Anger could be dismissed as prejudice. Calm sounded like law. He moved through the evidence with the patience of a surgeon cutting away everything soft enough to bleed, presenting each human rescue as if it were a military incursion wearing a medic's mask. There were maps of crossed borders, timelines of ignored evacuation holds, intercepted command logs, and helmet recordings from human crews who had entered sealed zones after being told no living organism could remain inside them. The first recording came from the ash belt of Norin 3, where a volcanic chain had split 3 cities apart while 2 rival governments argued over which evacuation treaty applied. Dominion vessels had waited at the boundary line for authorization. Human ships had not. They went low through the smoke, burned through their landing shields, and dropped rescue teams onto streets that no official map still recognized. Valus froze the image on a human engineer dragging a wounded alien soldier across molten glass while that same soldier tried to stab him with a broken blade. Unauthorized extraction of an active combatant, Valus said. Violation of battlefield neutrality. Elian watched the image without blinking. He was pinned under a transport beam. He belonged to a hostile army. He was breathing. A murmur moved through the observers, not loud enough to interrupt, but enough for the court censors to register a shift in emotional tone. Valus heard it and adjusted instantly. He did not attack the answer. He drowned it in numbers. He listed the cost of human interference, damaged corridors, diplomatic protests, quarantine breaches, rescue teams exposed to unknown pathogens, and 3 incidents where young coalition pilots had disobeyed standing orders after witnessing human crews do the same. His argument was not that humans failed to save lives. That would have been too easy to challenge. His argument was that humans saved lives in a way that made obedience look immoral. That was the first moment the court began to understand the true charge. Humanity was not on trial for recklessness alone. Humanity was on trial because other species were starting to imitate it. Elian felt the room shift around that realization. Some delegates leaned forward. Others stiffened as though the accusation had touched something private. On the outer feeds, thousands of minor worlds watched from administrative halls, mining platforms, school shelters, medical ships, places where emergency law was not an abstract structure but the difference between whether anyone came at all. Elian knew those people were watching because some of them had sent messages before the trial began, not official pleas, not political statements, just short encrypted fragments that Earth Command had allowed him to read once. My brother lived because your crew checked the silence. My colony was not on any map. My daughter still asks whether humans always run toward fire. Valus called those messages emotional contamination. Elian called them names. The second recording showed a human medical shuttle breaking through a quarantine veil around the Let Hari Bloom plague. Dominion law required infected settlements to remain sealed until the pathogen's mutation cycle stabilized. The cycle would have taken 8 days. The settlement had oxygen for 3. Human medics entered on the second day, wearing suits built overnight from mining insulation and agricultural filters because no approved medical kit could be delivered in time. They saved 13,000 residents and lost 42 of their own when the bloom adapted to expose skin cells through a cracked glove seal. Valus let the casualty list fill the chamber because he thought death would serve him. This is the pattern, he said. Humanity does not merely endanger political order. It endangers itself and then calls the wound virtue. The judges accepted the file with solemn faces. Several looked toward Elian, expecting shame or defense. Elian gave them neither. He studied the faces of the 42 dead as they appeared above him, one by one, and the court saw something it had not been prepared to see. Not denial. Not pride. Recognition. He knew them. Perhaps not all personally, but in the way humans seem to know their dead, as if every sacrifice became part of a shared interior country no outsider could enter without permission. When the last face vanished, Elian said, "You keep showing the price like we were unaware of it." Valus turned slowly. "Were you?" "No," Elian said. "That is why we counted twice." It was a strange answer, and because it was strange, it stayed in the chamber longer than a speech would have. Sarai heard it with a force that made her chest tighten. Counted twice. The phrase touched something buried beneath official memory, a memory of smoke and cold metal and a voice speaking a language she had not understood when she was 5 years old. She had been told Dominion wardens found her under a collapsed nursery wall after the Caro's border strike. She had been told the wardens counted the survivors by clan band and evacuation tag. She had believed that story because children believe the first version of mercy they are given. Now a sealed file from that same disaster sat locked beneath her private screen, and the human patch inside it bore a rescue insignia that Dominion records insisted had never been there. She should have reported the discrepancy at once. Judicial doctrine demanded it. Instead, she hid the file behind a procedural overlay and watched Elian Ward with a new and terrible attention.
The defense advocate assigned to Earth rose next, an older human woman named Amara Say, whose silver hair was braided tightly against the back of her head and whose voice carried no softness except the kind made by discipline. She did not deny a single violation. She confirmed them so precisely that several court clerks looked up from their transcripts. Yes, humanity had crossed the Noran border. Yes, humanity had pierced the Let-Hari quarantine. Yes, humanity had entered the Ant-Hell War corridor, the Sova famine belt, the unregistered refugee stacks above Mur, and the collapsed ice tunnels of Voskar without waiting for legal clearance. The admissions should have weakened her position. Instead, they stripped Velis of the pleasure of revelation. Then Amara changed the frame. She displayed a timeline of each disaster, not by political notification, but by survivability. She showed when official channels became aware. She showed when authorization would have been granted under Dominion standards. Then she showed the estimated point after which rescue would no longer matter because there would be no one left to rescue. In case after case, the legal response arrived after the living window had closed. Dominion law is excellent at assigning responsibility after catastrophe, Amara said. Human emergency doctrine exists because bodies cannot wait for paperwork to become compassionate. Velis objected. High Judge Merricks allowed the statement to remain. Amara continued, and the story of humanity's rescue fleet unfolded in fragments sharper than propaganda because none of them had been polished enough to feel safe. The fleet had not been born from conquest, ambition, or a desire to impress the stars. It began after the collapse of the human colony of St. Leora, where delayed routing, political caution, and one misclassified distress signal left 68,000 people trapped under a poisoned atmosphere. Earth's ships arrived too late to save most of them. For 12 days, human crews dug through glass storms and chemical rain anyway, pulling out the few who had survived inside sealed basements, drainage tunnels, cargo vaults, and one school theater where teachers had kept children alive by rationing emergency oxygen through musical instrument tubing. After St. Leora, humans wrote a law that no Dominion scholar had ever managed to categorize cleanly. The unclaimed distress protocol did not require a plea. It did not require treaty status. It did not require proof that survivors existed. It required only the possibility of life and the absence of anyone else moving fast enough. A vanished signal, a heat bloom in ruins, a colony that stopped transmitting, a ship drifting off course, an evacuation list with numbers that did not add up. If something looked wrong, humans checked. That is not stability, Velis said. That is instinct institutionalized. Amara looked at him. Yes. The answer unsettled the court because it was not defensive. It was agreement sharpened into defiance. For the first time, Sarai understood why the older judges feared the case. It was not because humanity had broken rules. Many powers broke rules. The Dominion had forgiven stronger species for worse when strategy required it. Humanity's danger was different. Humans made disobedience look like conscience. They made hesitation feel like cowardice. They had built an entire operational structure around the idea that the unknown suffering of strangers carried authority. Velis sensed the emotional tide turning and released his strongest evidence. The chamber darkened. A helmet feed appeared, shaky with impact distortion. Human medics moved through a corridor lit by emergency red. Somewhere nearby, weapons fire cracked against metal. The species on the floor were Kalrathi, enemies of Earth during the border conflict. Their soldiers had fired on human settlements 6 months earlier. Their commanders still refused formal apology. In the recording, a human medic knelt beside a Kalrathi child whose breathing mask had shattered. A voice from the feed shouted, They're still shooting at us. Another human voice answered, breathless and furious. They're shooting because they are scared. Keep loading the children. No one spoke after that. Even Valus let the silence work, believing perhaps that the madness of it would condemn humanity better than his argument could. Instead, something worse for him happened. The chamber believed the voice. Not legally, not politically, not yet, but emotionally. In that hidden place where every civilization stores the truths it survives by refusing to say aloud. The court understood, for one dangerous second, that the human in the recording had not been confused. He knew exactly who was shooting. He knew exactly what they had done. He knew exactly what it might cost to save their children anyway. And he had gone forward. Sarai's private screen pulsed once. The sealed file had completed its restoration. She should not have opened it during active proceedings.
She did.
The image loaded slowly, damaged by age and deliberate erasure. A nursery dome.
Smoke.
A child wrapped in thermal cloth. A human rescuer carrying her with one arm while using the other to hold a collapsing door frame long enough for 2 more children to crawl through. The rescuer's face was obscured by ash and helmet glare, but the patch on the shoulder was clear. The same symbol. Below the image, a line of deleted metadata flickered back into existence. First responder on scene, Earth civilian rescue vessel Halcyon Mercy. Sarai stopped breathing. All her life, she had been told the Dominion saved her. The court was still arguing over whether humans were too dangerous to answer distress calls when Sarai realized she was alive because one of them had ignored the law. Sarai closed the restored file before anyone could see her face change, but closing it did not put the truth back where the Dominion had buried it. The image remained inside her mind with brutal clarity. The nursery smoke, the broken frame, the human arm holding impossible weight, and the child wrapped against a chest that should never have crossed that border. She had worn Dominion honor marks for surviving that night. She had built her career on loyalty to the institution that claimed to have saved her. Now the first true record of her life said the law had arrived late, and a human had arrived early. Valus continued his argument as if the court had not shifted beneath him. He spoke of precedent, sovereignty, and the danger of emotional contagion among young civilizations. He described humanity as a species whose empathy functioned like an invasive signal, spreading through institutions not by conquest, but by embarrassment. After humans entered a disaster zone, others asked why they had waited. After humans saved an enemy, others questioned whether enemies' status mattered inside burning buildings. After humans searched an abandoned settlement that no one had reported missing, other captains began checking gaps in their own maps. The prosecutor did not call this inspiration. He called it systemic infection. For the first time, Elian smiled faintly, and the expression did not reach his eyes. "You make us sound more powerful than we are." Valus turned toward him with the satisfaction of a trap closing. "Power is not measured only by weapons, Captain Ward. Sometimes it is measured by the number of lawful officers who hesitate because your species has taught them hesitation can be shameful." A ripple moved through the upper galleries, where border commanders, emergency ministers, and coalition observers sat in perfect ceremonial distance from the consequences of their policies. Some looked offended. Some looked afraid. A few looked away, and Elian knew those were the ones who had once watched a timer run out while waiting for permission that came too late. High Judge Merricks ordered the prosecution to proceed to the final risk assessment. The chamber lights dimmed further, and a statistical lattice unfolded over Elian's head. It showed projected civil disruption if Earth's rescue fleet remained independent, treaty challenges, emergency jurisdiction disputes, unauthorized border crossings, resource conflicts, and an increasing probability that non-human rescue crews would begin invoking human precedent to override containment orders. The numbers were precise, elegant, and bloodless. Then Valus displayed the human casualty figure. 1,842. The number hung in the air alone. "These are not enemy losses," Valus said quietly. "These are not civilians saved. These are human responders dead in operations outside their jurisdiction. Humanity has normalized voluntary loss. It has taught its young that dying for strangers is admirable. That doctrine is not mercy. It is a weapon aimed first at themselves, and then at every civilization forced to explain why it did not do the same. For a moment, the accusation struck where it was meant to strike. Even Elian felt it, not because he agreed with Valus, but because the number was not abstract to him. He knew the rituals attached to it, the folded uniforms, the final messages stored in black archives, the families who smiled during memorial feeds until the transmission ended and grief could become private. He knew the names inside that number, including one name the Dominion did not yet know mattered. Mara Keene rose to answer, but Elian lifted a hand slightly.
She stopped.
That small human gesture traveled through the chamber like a thrown blade. A defendant interrupting his own advocate should have looked reckless. Instead, it looked like command. "I will not apologize for the dead," Elian said. "They knew what they were doing. We do not honor them by pretending they were tricked into courage." Valus's eyes narrowed. "So, you admit the culture is intentional?" "Yes," Elian said. "We teach our children to run from danger when running saves them. We also teach them that sometimes someone smaller is behind you, and then running is not the first duty anymore." The court did not know how to classify that answer. It was not legal. It was not strategic. Yet it settled over the room with the strange gravity human statements sometimes carried, as if simplicity had been forged under pressure until it became difficult to move. Sarai looked down at her sealed file again. "Someone smaller is behind you." The restored image had shown exactly that. 2 children crawling beneath the human rescuer's arm. Another child held against the chest. Herself. Smaller, nameless, politically inconvenient, not yet worth violating a border for under Dominion law. A private alert flashed across her judgment slate. At first she thought it was connected to the old file, and fear sharpened through her. Then the emergency seal expanded, red and immediate. Not archived.
Live.
High Judge Merricks received the same alert a second later. His expression hardened before the court clerk even spoke. The suspended feeds above the chamber fractured into a new image, a dark mining moon spinning unevenly around a gas giant, its southern hemisphere pulsing with reactor fire. Tasser, 9, population officially listed at 46,000 registered laborers, unofficial estimates unknown. Stateless refugee workforce. No sovereign sponsor. No emergency guarantor. The clerk's voice shook despite training. Reactor chain instability has triggered subcrustal collapse. Surface habitation failure estimated within 6 hours. The court erupted in controlled chaos. Delegates spoke over one another in clipped bursts. Dominion officers opened response channels. Legal aids pulled up jurisdiction categories. The mining moon fell between 7 treaties and belonged fully to none of them. Its residents extracted fuel for powers that did not claim them, lived in domes no government inspected, and existed in administrative language as temporary labor mass. They had been useful enough to employ and too inconvenient to protect. Valus recovered first. This is unrelated to the present proceeding. Elian turned toward the live feed. His face changed, not dramatically, not theatrically, but with a terrifying human stillness that made Sarai understand another piece of the species before her. Humans did not become calm because danger was small. They became calm when the time for argument ended. Amara's wrist compulsed. She read it once and looked at Elian. Valus saw the exchange. "What have you done?" Elian did not answer him. He looked to High Judge Merricks. "How long has the moon been silent?" The judge hesitated. "That information is not relevant to your defense. It is relevant to whether anyone is still alive underground." A Dominion officer reluctantly supplied the answer. "Primary channels failed 19 hours ago. Automated industrial telemetry continued until 12 minutes ago." Elian's jaw tightened. Then they had longer than 6 hours. 6 hours is when the surface dies. It is not when the dying started. The chamber quieted around him because the distinction was horrifying and because he had made it instantly. Valus stepped forward. "Captain Ward, while this trial remains active, Earth's rescue fleet is under provisional restriction. Any movement toward Tasser, 9 will be treated as deliberate violation of Dominion authority." Amara closed her eyes briefly, not in surrender, but in recognition of a choice everyone had known was coming from the moment the alert appeared. The main feed shifted again. Ships had entered the edge of the Tasser system. They were human, not warships, not sleek diplomatic craft. Rescue carriers, ugly and modular, built with exposed docking ribs, medical spines, heat-scored armor, and engine signatures that suggested they had burned through every safe transit limit to arrive early. They had not waited for court permission. They had not waited for political classification. They had seen silence, heat, collapse, and possible life, and they had moved. Valus looked almost triumphant. Order them to stand down. Every eye turned to Elian. High Judge Merrick spoke with the weight of the entire Dominion behind him. Captain Ward, you will transmit immediate recall. Compliance will be considered in sentencing. Refusal will confirm the prosecution's charge that humanity cannot be trusted to respect galactic order. Elian stared at the rescue carriers on the feed. Somewhere inside those ships were crews who knew the court was watching. Somewhere inside that moon were people who did not. That was the difference that mattered. I cannot recall them, he said. Valus's triumph sharpened. Cannot, or will not? Cannot. The prosecutor laughed once, coldly. How convenient. Elian finally turned from the feed. You misunderstand our command structure. The unclaimed distress protocol does not belong to me once possible life is detected and no recognized authority is responding inside the survivability window. Operational command transfers to the nearest qualified rescue crew. Civilian oversight can review them afterward. Politicians can debate afterward. Courts can punish afterward. Merrick's leaned forward. And before? Elian's voice was steady enough to frighten the room. Before they rescue. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was impact. Sarai understood then why the Dominion truly feared them. Humanity had not merely built fast ships or brave crews. It had designed a civilization-level refusal to let hesitation disguise itself as order. It had taken the fragile, irrational impulse to check on strangers in the dark and hardened it into law, machinery, training, and command. It had made compassion operationally irreversible. On the live feed, the first human carrier crossed the forbidden perimeter around Tasser. 9. Dominion alarms filled the chamber. Valus demanded sanctions. Merrick's called for emergency injunctions. Delegates shouted over translation channels as the moon cracked open beneath them all. Then a voice from the lead human ship cut across the court feed, calmed through static and fire. This is rescue carrier Dawnline entering descent. We have thermal traces below the southern labor stacks. Multiple pockets. Repeat, multiple pockets. There are more people down there than the registry admits. Sarai's hand moved to the sealed file before she could stop it. The Dominion had missed them again.
The truth has now become impossible to control. Sari has discovered that her life was not saved by the Dominion, but by a human rescue vessel called the Halcyon Mercy. Meanwhile, Tasser 9 is collapsing. Life before the court and Earth rescue carriers have entered the forbidden zone, despite every legal threat against them. Alien cannot recall them because humanity designed the unclaimed distress protocol to act before politics can delay rescue. Now, the Dominion must watch everything it tried to condemn. Humans moving toward danger because someone unseen might still be alive.
The court watched the first human carrier fall toward Tasser, 9 like a wounded star refusing to burn out. Its hull flared white against the moon's ruptured atmosphere, heat shields screaming under stress loads that Dominion vessels would have classified as unacceptable before descent even began. No one in the chamber spoke. The alarm still pulsed along the walls, red and formal and useless, but the sound seemed smaller now than the voice coming through the rescue feed. Dawnline to all teams, southern labor stacks are not abandoned. Repeat, not abandoned. We have heat signatures under the collapsed transit spine and movement inside sealed service tunnels. Registry count is wrong by at least 12,000. At least 12,000. The number passed through the court like a physical thing. Delegates who had spent their careers debating emergency categories now stared at the live feed and saw the cost of categories that failed to include the desperate. Tasser 9 was not a recognized colony, not a sovereign protectorate, not a priority relief zone. It was a place where governments sent the unwanted to mine fuel and then discovered, at the moment of collapse, that the unwanted had children. Valus recovered first because men like him survived by mistaking control for truth. "This broadcast is prejudicial," he said. "The rescue feed should be restricted until the court can verify the claims." Elian did not look at him. "They are not claims. They are body heat." On the main display, human drop pods broke away from the carrier in clusters of 6, each one trailing fire as it punched through ash cloud and electrical storm. Dominion analysts began feeding numbers to the court in strained voices. Wind shear beyond safe limits. Surface fracture expanding north. Reactor bloom spreading through lower shafts. Estimated time to total habitat failure revised from 6 hours to 4 hours and 17 minutes. The numbers kept shrinking, but the human ships kept descending. Sarai had judged thousands of cases involving unauthorized action, and she had always believed that law was the last structure standing between civilization and panic. Now she watched humans move with frightening discipline inside the very situation her training had taught her to fear most. They were not chaotic. They were not drunk on heroism. They were precise, layered, coordinated, and fast. One team sealed a ruptured dome with emergency foam while another cut through a collapsed pressure corridor. Medics sorted survivors by breath quality before species classification. Engineers ignored official access routes and mapped structural weaknesses from vibration alone. They did not ask whether the refugees belonged to any recognized authority. They asked where the air was thinning. A helmet feed opened from Team Harrow, entering the southern labor stacks. The corridor beyond them looked less like a mine than the inside of a dying machine. Pipes sagged from the ceiling. Sparks fell into ankle-deep chemical runoff. A human rescuer moved at the front, one hand on the wall, reading the tremors through her glove as if the moon itself was speaking in a language she almost understood. "Left side is hollow," she said. "Scans missed a compartment." A Dominion structural officer objected over the shared channel. "That wall is load-bearing. Cutting through it may accelerate collapse." The human rescuer paused only long enough to answer. "Then we cut politely." A tool burned to life. The court watched a section of wall peel open, and behind it was a maintenance chamber packed with people who had not appeared on any registry. Children blinked into the helmet light. Elderly laborers shielded their eyes. A woman clutching an infant began crying before the humans even reached her, as if rescue was something she had stopped believing in and now had no place to put the shock of its arrival. The chamber shifted again, but this time the movement was not political. It was emotional and therefore more dangerous. Sarai saw it in the delegates' faces. They had come to watch humanity be disciplined. Instead, they were watching humanity expose the moral blindness built into everyone else's systems. Valus knew it too. "Anecdotes do not overturn law," he said sharply. "No," Sarai said before she meant to speak. Every judge turned toward her. The court froze around the breach in protocol. Sarai felt the weight of it, the old machinery of rank and silence pressing against her ribs, but the sealed file beneath her hand was heavier. For 22 years, the Dominion had allowed her to thank the wrong saviors. For 22 years, a human had remained erased because acknowledging the rescue would have embarrassed the border doctrine that left children behind. She opened the file onto the central display. The nursery dome appeared above the court beside the live feed from Tasser Vale. Past and present stood together in blue light and ash. A 5-year-old child wrapped in thermal cloth. A human rescuer holding up a failing frame. 2 more children crawling beneath the rescuer's arm. The medical patch on the human's shoulder, burned at the edges but clear enough for every translator to identify. Sarai stood. Her voice remained steady because if it broke, they might call it emotion and dismiss it. This file was sealed under Dominion authority after the Caro's border strike. Official history states that Dominion wardens recovered the surviving children from Nursery Dome 7. That history is false. The first responder on scene was the Earth civilian rescue vessel Halcyon Mercy. A sound moved through the chamber, not quite outrage, not quite grief. Sarai looked at Valus, then at the judges, then finally at Elian Ward. I was one of those children. For the first time since the trial began, Valus had no immediate answer. On the live feed, Team Harrow began moving survivors out of the hidden chamber. The infant's oxygen mask failed halfway through extraction, and a human medic pulled off part of her own emergency line to keep the child breathing. Another rescuer shouted that the transit spine was shifting. A third answered that the last group was not clear. The exchange was fast, practical, almost ordinary, and that ordinariness broke something in the court worse than drama could have. Humans did not become merciful for an audience. They did not wait until gratitude was guaranteed. They did the work as if the work itself had authority. High Judge Merrick's voice came out lower than before. Captain Ward, did you know of Judge Vaughn's connection to this file? No, Elian said. Sarai heard the truth in it and, strangely, wished for a moment that he had known. It would have made the universe feel less accidental. Instead, the truth was larger and more painful. Humanity had saved her without knowing what she would become, without knowing she would one day sit in judgment over them, without knowing she would matter to anyone beyond the smoke-filled seconds in which she was small and alive and needed caring. Then the moon screamed. The sound was not literal, but every sensor translated the collapse into a violent distortion that filled the chamber. A lower reactor shelf had given way beneath the southern stacks. The evacuation route vanished in a bloom of dust and static. For 3 seconds, the feed from Team Harrow went black. When it returned, the camera was sideways. A human voice coughed once, then steadied. Gate is failing. Survivors are past the first lock, but the pressure wave will catch them before the carrier lift. Dawnline answered immediately. Can you seal from your side? A pause followed, just long enough for every person in the court to understand the meaning of the question. Yes, the rescuer said. Manual hold only. Elian closed his eyes for half a second. Not in weakness. In recognition. On the display, 3 humans braced themselves against a buckling pressure gate while refugees stumbled through the far corridor toward extraction lights. There was no speech. No anthem. No final declaration crafted for history. One rescuer adjusted her grip because her glove was slipping. Another told a child to keep looking forward. The third laughed once when the gate slammed hard enough to crack his visor, not because anything was funny, but because humans sometimes laughed when fear ran out of useful tasks. Sarai watched them hold. The hidden children cleared the corridor. The gate failed. Static swallowed the feed. No one in the Vera Dominion court moved. Even Valus stood silent, his arguments intact and suddenly irrelevant in the face of what everyone had just witnessed. Law could punish those humans. It could classify them, condemn them, erase them, and build monuments to itself over the place where they had fallen. But it could not make them wrong. Not anymore. Not in front of the galaxy. High Judge Mayrix called the final vote with a voice stripped of ceremonial distance. The charge before the court was whether Earth's rescue fleet represented a threat to galactic order and should be dismantled. One by one, the judgments registered. Some came slowly. Some came with visible shame. When Sarai's turn arrived, she did not look at the other judges. Humanity is a threat, she said. Valus lifted his head. Sarai continued. Not to order. To indifference. Her vote struck the chamber like a bell. The final ruling did not absolve every violation, because institutions rarely confess so cleanly. It did something more permanent. It created a new emergency category under interstellar law, unclaimed life response. Any vessel detecting credible signs of living beings inside a survivability window could act before jurisdiction was resolved. Review would come after rescue. Permission would no longer be allowed to arrive after the dead. Across the external feeds, the first non-human ships began changing course toward Tasser Sning. Elian saw it before the court announced it. Kelrathi patrol craft. Dominion medical barges. 2 neutral mining haulers. A Sovun quarantine vessel whose captain had once filed a protest against human interference. They moved awkwardly at first, as if ashamed to be seen learning in public, but they moved. After the ruling, Sarai met Elian in the quiet corridor behind the judgment chamber. She carried the recovered image on a thin memory shard and the burned patch from the restored evidence seal. Up close, Elian looked older than he had in the dock, not because the trial had weakened him, but because the live feed had added names to the place behind his eyes where the dead were kept. Sarai offered him the patch. The rescuer who carried me out of the nursery died before Dominion wardens arrived. The record lists no name. I thought Earth might have one. Elian looked at the patch, and all the command in him vanished for one unguarded second. We do, he said quietly. Her name was Mara Ward. Sarai understood before he said the rest. My sister, Elian said. The corridor seemed to lose sound around them. Sarai looked down at the patch that had crossed 22 years, 2 governments, 1 lie, and an entire trial to return to the family that had never been told what their dead had truly done. She had wanted to thank humanity. Instead, she found herself standing before the brother of the woman who had held up the door. I am sorry, Sarai said. Elian took the patch with careful hands. She would have asked how many got out. Sarai's throat tightened, but this time she allowed the emotion to exist. 312. Elian nodded once, and the grief in his face changed shape. It did not shrink. It became useful. Beyond the corridor glass, Tasser, 9 burned under a sky crowded with ships. Human carriers were still closest to the fire, but they were no longer alone. More vessels arrived every minute, answering not a treaty, not an order, not a flag, but a possibility that someone in the dark might still be breathing. For generations, the galaxy had believed humanity's defining danger was that humans would cross any border. Only now did it understand the truth. Humans crossed borders because suffering did.
And that is the lesson the galaxy finally learned. Humanity was never dangerous because it ignored borders for power. Humanity was dangerous because it refused to let borders decide who deserved to live. Captain Alien Ward carried the legacy of Mara Ward, the sister who saved Sherry before anyone knew her name would matter. Sherry carried the truth that love without compassion can become abandonment. And when Teaser 9 burned, the galaxy saw what humans had always understood. Rescue does not begin when permission arrives. It begins when someone hears silence and chooses to check.